anche dell'Italia stessa.
The third and the fourth chapter have been written respectively by Demetrio Xoccato and me. And they're focused on the part of the history related to the Masonic presence during the liberal period. And we are talking about the unification of Italy up to the early 20th century. And this part is pivotal regarding the index of the book, since describes the birth of the strictly first Italian obedience and the Grande Oriente d'Italia, the Grand Orient of Italy. And so all the facts related to this obedience are shown up, mostly stressing some outcoming figures that were important not just for the Masonic history, but for the history of the Italian institutions too. We are talking about people such as Adriano Lemmi, Ernesto Nathan, and Ettore Ferrari.
Invece il capitolo successivo è scritto da Nicoletta Cassano, una collega, offre una disamina completa rispetto al periodo della Prima Guerra Mondiale. Si inoltra poi nella descrizione e analisi di uno dei periodi più bui della storia del Grande Oriente d'Italia durante il periodo fascista. Questo capitolo si collega poi al sesto capitolo, che è in realtà un piccolo cameo scritto da me, che tratta la questione dell'esilio della massoneria italiana. Quindi, oltre alla descrizione dell'esilio, ho descritto anche il modo in cui il Grande Oriente d'Italia è riuscito a non subire l'oblio massonico, ossia grazie all'opera di alcuni grandi esponenti della massoneria italiana che hanno lavorato massonicamente al di fuori dei confini nazionali, e il capitolo giunge fino alla ripresa delle attività della Seconda Guerra Mondiale.
The next chapter by Nicoletta Casano gives a broad overview on First World War period to go deep into the analysis of one of the most gloomy period in the history of Italy related to the fascist regime. And the sixth one, so the second one, is strictly linked to the one by Nicoletta Casano, has been written by me, and handles the issue of the exile of Italian Masonry. So behind the description of the exile period, the issue that has been stressed is how the Grand Orient of Italy has been able to resist to the oblivion, to the Masonic oblivion. So thanks to the opera and to the deep work that has been done by a few figures of Italian Masonry that were very, very extensively working also from abroad, so moving their hats also out from the Italian boundaries. And the chapter goes up to the Second World War, after Second World War, with the restart of the Masonic activities.
Fino a questo capitolo avevamo proceduto seguendo un ordine cronologico, invece negli ultimi due capitoli, quindi il 7 e l'8, si è proceduto invece con la descrizione di alcuni temi importanti cari alla massoneria italiana. Nel primo di questi casi si è studiato il tema, diciamo, delle logge italiane dipendenti dal GOI, che furono fondate all'estero, in territori quali quelli del vicino Oriente, Nord Africa e nel Corno d'Africa. Uno studio a cui mi dedico ormai da 15 anni e che mi ha portato a sostenere che in molte comunità italiane che si trovavano all'estero era comunque possibile trovare una o più logge massoniche. Questo ovviamente è a riprova della vitalità della massoneria del Grande Oriente d'Italia.
Up to the 6th chapter, the order that has been followed was strictly chronological. While in part 7 and 8, the description of a few issues very close to Masonry, to Italian Masonry, has been focused specifically. So in the very first one, there was the case of Italian lodges depending from Goy that were built abroad. Mostly in the territories of the Near Orient, in the north of Africa and the Horn of Africa. So this is a study, a topic that I have been working for 15 years, and then has brought me to support the thesis that many communities, many Italian communities abroad were actually keeping one or more than one Masonic lodges to support the vitality of the Grand Orient of Italy, also out from the nation, out from Italy.
L'ultimo capitolo invece è dedicato a un tema importante, qual è quello della solidarietà laica. È scritto da Demetrio Xoccatto e il saggio offre una panoramica dell'impegno massonico in ambito sociale in età liberale. Dopo i primissimi anni seguenti all'unificazione e ai conseguenti tentativi di riunire tutte le forze massoniche in un unico organismo, la massoneria poté finalmente rivolgere la sua azione alla società civile. A partire dalla fine degli anni 60 dell'Ottocento ci furono diversi tentativi per istituire sia enti educativi sia assistenziali nelle città italiane. Infatti, ad esempio, il problema della diffusione dell'istruzione e in funzione anche dell'attività lavorativa e della povertà emersero prepotentemente e la massoneria fece quanto era in suo potere per combattere questi fenomeni. Il libro poi termina con questo ultimo capitolo, 8º. In realtà questo libro è solo l'inizio di un percorso che io intendo intraprendere. Infatti spero di riuscire a scrivere a breve la seconda parte del libro che tratta praticamente, cronologicamente parlando, dalla ripresa delle attività dopo la Seconda Guerra Mondiale fino al 2000. In questo modo vorrei riuscire a spiegare in modo soddisfacente e in modo soprattutto scientifico qual è stata la storia del Grande Oriente d'Italia dopo la Seconda Guerra Mondiale. È un periodo storico che ancora non è stato trattato dal punto di vista scientifico e quindi mi interesserebbe fare questo lavoro. Spero magari alla prossima conferenza di Parigi di riuscire a presentare il secondo volume.
The last chapter is dedicated to the links between Freemasonry and secular solidarity. It has been written by Demetrio Xoccatto, and the contribution endorses the issues of education and philanthropy, enlightening one of the most brilliant profiles in Masonry. So the mutualism, the laical mutualism. So this essay gives an overview of the Masonic engagement in the social during the liberal age, and after the very early years, after the unification of Italy and the attempt to gather all the Masonic resources in a solo institution, Masonry was then able to just give its own attention and then all its effort to the civil society. So beginning from the 70s of the 19th century, there have been many attempts to build up educational bodies and charities in Italian cities. the issues on the diffusion of open education, also to support the working activities, and the matter of poverty were very, very diffused and hard to fight. And so Freemasonry made all that was in its means and will to fight this phenomenon. Of course, this is just a part of a more broad and ambitious project to go on with a second volume and link the span of time after Second World War to nowadays, and since it's again another moment that deserves to be depicted and broadly faced also for a non-Italian audience, a non-Italian kind of target. And so she hopes, I hope, that in the next symposium in Paris there will be the chance to handle the presentation of the second volume of this opera. Thank you.
So now Emanuela will do her second paper. It's on the Grand Lodge of Italy, a paradigm of co-masonry in Italy.
Sempre io. Allora, in questa seconda presentazione, in questa seconda relazione, invece vorrei parlare del risultato delle mie ricerche sulla Grande Loggia d'Italia. A dire il vero, queste ricerche sono ancora molto parziali perché fino ad oggi è un tema veramente poco studiato. In particolare vorrei porre l'accento in questo caso sull'apporto che le donne hanno dato in questa obbedienza, che ricordo essere la più importante in Italia tra le obbedienze miste, quelle in cui c'è la convivenza di uomini e donne nelle stesse logge.
On the second paper, I'd like to introduce you the accounts of my research. Actually, it's still prefatory compared to the main scenario I'll outline today. So the birth and the development of the Grand Lodge of Italy, and especially the female contribution to this obedience, which is very eminent in Italy, to be assumed as gender mixed, namely dealing with the presence of women and men together.
La difficoltà innanzitutto nella ricostruzione della storia di questa obbedienza risiedono soprattutto nell'impossibilità che ho avuto, almeno fino al mese scorso, di accedere alle fonti e ai loro archivi. Però adesso diciamo la situazione è migliorata, è un po' cambiata, anche se ci vorrà comunque ancora un po' di tempo per scrivere la storia della Grande Loggia d'Italia con metodo scientifico. Quindi quelli che presento oggi sono solo delle tracce rispetto alle notizie, alle fonti che sono riuscita a reperire finora.
The effort in drafting the history of these obedience lies above all in the difficulty to consult its funds, and this has been until last month. The state has now improved. The writing on the Grand Lodge of Italy with a scientific method is work in bulk that has yet to come.
Volendo fare un breve excursus storico, bisogna dire che questa obbedienza nasce nel 1908 da uno scisma interno al Grande Oriente d'Italia portato avanti da Saverio Affera. Non nasce come un'obbedienza mista, ma all'inizio era solo maschile.
Willing to arrange a brief excursus, it's essential to state the obedience arising in 1908 from a schism within the Grand Orient of Italy, led by Saverio Fela, did not begin but as just male obedience.
Bisogna anche sfatare un mito relativo alla nascita di questa obbedienza. Infatti non è collegato, lo scisma non è collegato al tema donne e massoneria, non è collegato al tema dell'appartenenza massonica femminile. La Grande Loggia d'Italia non nasce da una divergenza di vedute sulla possibilità di partecipazione delle donne alla massoneria. Il tema donne e massoneria viene dopo, entra in gioco molto dopo nella storia dell'obbedienza.
A further myth to solve on its birth and the female membership is that the Grand Lodge of Italy did not succeed because of divergence on the female involvement in Freemasonry. This issue came into play long after.
L'obbedienza nacque in realtà per contrapposizione interne al GOI circa l'opportunità che all'interno delle scuole elementari fosse permesso insegnare il catechismo della Chiesa Cattolica. Alcuni massoni erano contrari, e invece Saverio Offera e i suoi compagni erano possibilisti su questa possibilità, insomma, e questo creò comunque una frattura insanabile che determinò lo scisma, ma in questo caso ricordo che siamo ancora nel 1908.
The obedience was born due to inner dispute within the GOE on the opening to Catholic catechism to be taught in primary schools. And so some Masons opposed. Ferra and his companions were instead open to these, and the situation fatally led to the schism. Though we are speaking of 1908.
Dovrà passare il periodo del fascismo, con la conseguente eliminazione della massoneria dal panorama associazionistico italiano. Dovrà passare anche la caduta del fascismo e il ritorno della massoneria in Italia, perché si parli anche di donne all'interno della Gran Loggia d'Italia.
So fascism will come with the resulting disposal of Freemasonry from the Italian world of associations, and then its fall with the re-entry of Masonry in Italy to let the women issue could be handled within the Grand Lodge of Italy.
Tra le poche notizie che sono riuscita a recuperare, a reperire, sia quella che nel 1946, quindi alla ripresa delle attività, a Napoli si costituisce la prima loggia femminile, chiamata Virtù, e nello stesso anno ne viene fondata un'altra chiamata Italia, sempre nella città di Napoli, che aveva come venerabile maestro Amelia Montini. Nel 1947 uno storico molto importante, Umberto Gorel Porciatti, venne chiamato ad analizzare le costituzioni del rito scozzese antico accettato per verificare se in tali costituzioni ci fossero delle indicazioni contrarie all'ingresso delle donne in massoneria. Appurarono effettivamente che non vi erano indicazioni contrarie, che non vi erano ostacoli, e quindi si ritenne che le donne potessero lavorare massonicamente sotto l'egida della Serenissima Gran Loggia Nazionale, per cui si decise proprio in quel periodo di far entrare le donne in massoneria. Lo stesso Porciatti fu incaricato tra l'altro di redigere gli statuti e i regolamenti che disciplinassero questa nuova situazione.
So just to begin, a few points to display. In 1946 in Naples, the first women-only lodge of the Universal Masonry was established under the name of Virtues. Even more in Naples, same year, comes founded another named Italia, Italy, and worshipful master was Amelia Montini. In 1947, Umberto Gorel Porciatti, an outstanding Freemasonry scholar, analyzes the constitution of the Scottish Rite, ancient and accepted, to check any item on the Rite opposing women enrollment into Masonry. And assessing no hindrance, He thought women could work under the aegis of the Masonry National Grand Lodge with its own statutes and regulation, pending the decision of the Masonic Worldwide Gathering. And the same Porciatti is in charge of drawing up the statutes and the acts.
Nel 1955 il nuovo Gran Maestro Tito Ceccherini quindi apre l'obbedienza alle donne, anche se secondo gli annali dell'obbedienza stessa erano già state iniziate delle donne nel 1921 a Firenze, e qui la signora si chiamava Noemi Trucci Ruspantini. Nel 1949 risulta iniziata Maier Mazzoni Bonanni a Milano, però questi sono solo degli esempi sporadici. Il 1 gennaio 1955 vengono iniziate, secondo appunto le fonti della Gran Loggia d'Italia, 2 donne, Giovanna Olmi a Roma e Adelaide Monelli a Catania.
In 1955, new Grandmaster Tito Ceccherini opens to women. Although, according to the Chronicles of Obedience, other women had already been initiated, so we are just omitting some scattered cases. So during 1921, in Florence, Noemi Trucci Ruspantini, and on 1949 in Milan, Maia Mazzoni Bonanni. Then on January 1955, 2 women are initiated according to the sources of the Grand Lodge of Italy. We're talking about other 2 cities. In Rome, Giovanna Olmi, and in Catania, Sicily, Adelaide Monelli.
Allora, praticamente secondo i registri matricolari nell'arco di tempo che va dagli anni 50 agli anni 60, quindi in 10 anni, furono iniziate 186 donne. Però di questo periodo non è stato possibile reperire altri dati e altri documenti a causa della mancanza di fonti, appunto. I primi dati poi che ritroviamo sono relativi agli anni 90. In particolare si deve sottolineare che nel 1994 le donne rappresentavano il 28% del totale dei membri dell'obbedienza. Tra l'altro, una piccola chicca, l'obbedienza aveva anche una rivista che si chiama Officine, che dal 2001 al 2011 fu diretta da una donna, Anna Giacomini, che era un 33° grado.
So to sum up, in the span 50s, 60s, 186 women were admitted as stated by the roll records. Afterwards, any other data can be resumed apart from those of the early 90s. And so, according to this, in 1994, women corresponded to the 28% of the world membership. And to add about the prominence of women, this Obedience released a magazine whose title was Officine, and from 2001 up to 2011 has been headed by Anna Giacomini, 33rd degree.
Nello specifico, in questa occasione vorrei indicare alcuni punti cardine, diciamo, della storia della Grande Loggia d'Italia per quanto riguarda una regione a me particolarmente cara, cioè la Sardegna, che è la mia regione. Secondo alcuni studi portati avanti dal professor Marco Novarini, l'obbedienza negli anni 40 poteva contare sulla presenza nel territorio della Sardegna di 8 logge, distribuite tra Cagliari, Sassari, Alghero, Olbia, Oristano e Nuoro. Però mancano le fonti per ricostruire la storia dell'obbedienza in Sardegna fino alla metà degli anni 80 del secolo scorso. Si hanno alcune notizie sporadiche che sono apparse per lo più nelle riviste o nei giornali, come ad esempio nell'Unione Sarda, in cui in prima pagina viene riportato l'appello della Federazione Massonica del Rito Scozzese Antico e Accettato, destinato ai lettori del primo Consiglio regionale sardo, agli elettori.
in order to add a few more records about this interesting path of research in the archives of the Great Lodge of Italy, I'm gonna focus on a region that is very close to my heart, since it's the place I come from, which is Sardinia. So, according to Professor Marco Novarino, late research work, the Grand Lodge of Italy at the end of the 40s could count on Sardinian territory on 8 lodges, 3 in Cagliari, 1 in Sassari, 1 in Alghero, 1 in Olbia, 1 in Oristano, and another one, a list in Nuoro. Regrettably, we lack in reference to profile its history in Sardinia until the middle 80s of the 20th century. There are just some sporadic news, such as the one that the headline newspaper Unione Sarda, Sardinian Union, just to catch, in 1949, that reported on the very front page a call by the Masonic Federation of the Scottish Rite, Ancient and Accepted, to address the voters of the First Sardinia Regional Council.
Per arrivare a avere notizie certe sulla situazione sarda si dovrà attendere parecchi anni. Nel 1988 si ha la fondazione a Cagliari della loggia all'ombra della caccia, che aveva come venerabile maestro una donna, Rita Marino, che fu insediata dal Gran Maestro Renzo Canova. Il rito relativo all'insediamento della loggia fu effettuato in realtà nel tempio di un'altra obbedienza mista, il Drown Man, e infatti che era rappresentato tra l'altro in quel caso dal suo, uno dei più importanti esponenti del Drown Man, che è Amedeo Incerpi. Quindi questa fu, diciamo, l'occasione di collaborazione tra le due obbedienze.
A few decades after, in 1988, the lodge All'Ombra della Caccia raises in Cagliari, and being its worshipful master Rita Marino, a woman, raised by the Grand Master Renzo Canova. What is further of importance, the establishment rite took place in the temple of another mixed obedience, the Droman. Thus, their highest representative, Amedeo Incerpi, was also present, also to state that it was not the sole event, the two obediences allied.
Nel corso degli anni ci sono in Sardegna altri esempi di donne che hanno guidato le rispettive logge. Parlo di Rosalia Corrias, prima donna venerabile a Nuoro, la signora Diana, primo venerabile a Cagliari. Dopo la fondazione della loggia cagliaritana fu fondata nel 2000, quindi parlo di anni relativamente recenti, a Nuoro una loggia chiamata Eleonora d'Arborea, che in poco tempo riuscì a stabilire dei rapporti internazionali con i massoni che risiedono in Corsica. Uno dei frutti più importanti di questo rapporto fu la firma del trattato di amicizia tra la Grande Loggia d'Italia e la Grande Loggia Mista di Francia. Tra l'altro in questa loggia si ebbe l'iniziazione della prima donna iniziata in Ogliastra, che è una parte della Sardegna.
Over the years, we number other cases in Sardinia on women mastering lodges. Rosalia Corrias, first worshipful master in Nuoro, and Mrs. Diana, the first in Cagliari. Unfortunately, we haven't got the first name of this worshipful master. After Cagliari, a lodge that was entitled to Eleonora d'Arborea was founded in Nuoro in 2000s and was networking with the Masonic brethren and sisters in Corsica. So one of the most relevant outcomes was the sign of the friendship deal amid the Grand Lodge of Italy and the Grand Mixed Lodge of France. And meaningful of these ateliers, so we are still talking about Eleonora d'Arborea, was the initiation of the very first woman in Ogliastra, which is an inner region of the Sardinian territory.
Interessante anche la storia legata alla Loggia Iside di Cagliari, che è stata fondata nel 2005 e quei membri probabilmente erano tutte donne. Allora dico probabilmente perché essendo così recente l'anno della fondazione non è possibile accedere ai documenti e ai nomi delle fondatrici o dei membri di questa loggia. Comunque è certo che la loggia fu guidata anche da un venerabile donna e fu guidata da altre donne per 2 mandati consecutivi fino al 2012. Ci sono altri esempi di logge sarde della Grande Loggia d'Italia guidate da donne, in particolare le logge Cavalieri della Rosa, Leonardo e Hercules sono state o sono tuttora guidate da donne. Questa che vi ho presentato oggi, diciamo, è solo una relazione parziale rispetto alle ricerche che sto iniziando ora in questi mesi e che spero mi porteranno, diciamo, a comprendere meglio questo esempio, questa obbedienza che è appunto mista, che è la più importante d'Italia e che potrebbe dare un contributo anche alla costruzione della storia della massoneria in Italia.
Also compelling are the facts linked to the lodge Iside, Isis, in Cagliari, that was born in 2005, whose members were perhaps women. The perhaps is mandatory since the lodge is too recent to be able to have any access to their own enrollment records. But to add something more specific and proved, these were led by the very first worshipful master of Cagliari. Thereafter, the above mentioned lodge, so the very last one, Isis, was led by another woman for 2 terms in a row, so until the date of 2012 when the lodge ceased. To add other examples, so we have the Cavalieri della Rosa, Leonardo and Hercules that have been or are still run by women. Of course, this scattering news just to submit to this patient audience to the possibilities that open from the chance to carry on a more in-depth research that deserves to be supported, appraising the interest on the team and also to depict a more complete history of Freemasonry in Italy till nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuela. So I think we should save questions to the end because we have 2 more presenters. So if we'll wait till the last 2 presenters and then we'll open the floor to questions just to stay on time. So the next presentation is Michael Coughlin. He's going to do his paper From Mythos to Logos, Andrea Palladio, Freemasonry and the Triumph of Minerva. And you're going to be using the podium?
Yeah, and I need the little thing for my images. PowerPoint, is that it? I mean, it's not up yet.
Yeah. There we go.
Very good. And then, okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you. Welcome everybody. I am going to do my presentation in English. Je parle français et puis italien aussi, mais il y en a des mots que je ne comprends pas. Alors je vais parler en anglais. And I would like to just begin very quickly with a little disclaimer because my presentation, First of all, I'm not a Freemason, and so my PhD is in architectural history, so it's a little bit of a new exploration area for me. And my second disclaimer is that I will be talking a little bit about the origins of Freemasonry, which yesterday Dr. Prescott did a very lengthy talk about. And, but I think he'd approve because I am looking at a transnational, I'm actually looking at the influence of Italy, actually, on Freemasonry. So it's well known that Freemasonry, or speculative Masonry as it's sometimes called, was crafted over several centuries, but continued to develop in Britain before it made its way to the Americas. There are many theories about the influences on Freemasonry, from Knights Templar to Rosicrucianism, and there are just as many theories about, or hypotheses about its origins. According to most scholars, Freemasonry made its first appearance in Scotland in the late 16th century, although there's evidence that it began much earlier. According to the Abbé Lefranc, a French monk writing from Caen in the 18th century, Freemasonry began in the small town of Vicenza in 1546. When a brotherhood arose from reformist supporters intent on destroying the Catholic Church. Founded by Lelio Socinus, the assemblies in Vicenza were organized around a systemic renunciation of the Catholic Church until word of the conspiracy reached ears of officials, Venetian officials, when those who were not put to death were actually forced to disperse or move their agenda underground. Lefranc's theory has been contested and supported by scholars on Freemasonry. Many disagree with Lefranc's accusations, saying that his accusations stem from a deep loathing of both Socinus and Freemasons alike. For others, however, the number of Socinians that made their way into Scotland and England following their expulsion from Vicenza are far too many to overlook. This, combined with the fact that Oliver Cromwell, likely a Socinian himself, bestowed upon them the name of Freemason, and also invented the allegory of the Temple of Solomon that would be adopted as by the society as a symbol for this society, only supports Lefranc's claim. The lack of scholarly consent suggests that the issue will never likely be resolved, and it seems foolhardy to take sides. However, the unprecedented number of reformers in Vicenza at the time arouses suspicions that there was something pivotal at work in the city. In identifying Socinus and his group of supporters as those responsible for the origins of Freemasonry, Lefranc also singles out the city of Vicenza at the very precise date of Andrea Palladio's first project in the city. In my new book, From Mythos to Logos, Andrea Palladio, Freemasonry and the Triumph of Minerva, which I have a copy of here if anyone wants to look at it after, I follow this thread to the end to unravel the knots that history has tied so tightly. Abbé Lefranc's proposition that Freemasonry as an organized society originated in Vicenza in 1546 warrants further consideration, given Palladio's presence in the city at the time. In his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry of 1863, Albert Mackey provides a persuasive account of Palladio's contribution to the Brotherhood. While Palladio may be renowned for having created the neoclassical style and considered the modern Vitruvius by many, such an assessment of the master is shamefully weak, according to Mackey. Such an assessment is shamefully weak in the eyes of any English Freemason. Mackey explains how John Shute had gone to Venice in the 1540s for 3 years to study Palladio's work, and how Palladio was the guiding inspiration for architects such as Christopher Wren and Inigo Jones, both of whom had ties to Freemasonry. Mackey also insists that it was Palladio who paved the way for speculative Masonry, and how enthusiasm for the Venetian master played a fundamental role in lodge meetings. As an example, Mackey provides the minutes of the 1737 meeting of the Old King's Arms Lodge, in which Palladio's Quattro Libri dell'Architettura, or 4 books of architecture, was read instead of the laws and constitutions normally read by Freemasons. In his Constitutions of the Freemasons of 1738, James Anderson argues that the Augustan style, so important to Freemasonry, was raised from rubbish, above all, quote, above all, by the great Palladio, who has not yet been duly imitated in Italy, with several master songs, venerating him. I think those are the songs there, yeah. According to Mackey and other Freemasons like John Fellows and Albert Pike, the entire mystery of Freemasonry can be unveiled in one single ambition: to recover the lost word or logos of God, the same logos said to be contained in the Ark of the Covenant. When discussing the ancient temples of Rome in Book 4, Palladio explains the relationship between time and the perpetual revolving of the heavens in terms of logos. Here, Palladio alludes to the logos of God, the divine architect, and suggests that temples created by architects on earth should compare with the universe, which was perfectly created by God with a single parola, the Italian equivalent of word or logos. Palladio's use of the word parola is evidence of the importance of logos to his architectural theory, but also his practice. In his 10 Libri dell'Architettura, Palladio's close friend Daniele Barbaro elaborated on Vitruvius, drawing an analogy between logos opticos and perspective, which he later wrote an entire treatise about. While Vitruvius made a strong case for the importance of logos in his De Architectura, clearly there was something more at risk for Palladio and those in his circle. Theirs was a time when the precise meaning of logos was brought into question and seriously scrutinized. Luther had, after all, made the character of the incarnate, ubiquitous Word essential to the Reformation, allowing logos to be examined with particular salience in Vicenza, which had become the stronghold for Lutheranism in the Italian peninsula. Palladio's mentor, Gian Giorgio Trissino, saw the divided state of Vicenza's religious system as a symbol of larger political and social fragmentation. He understood the value of logos, and looking for strategies to create peace and harmony in the peninsula, he originally advocated for common language that would eliminate rivalry and distrust. Though his efforts were unsuccessful, his knowledge of Vitruvius inspired new ways to obtain peninsular concord, and he subsequently promoted architecture as an appropriate language in a project of reform. Vitruvius may have provided architects of the Renaissance an inside view into the essentials of Roman architecture, but there was something more ancient, yet just as captivating to a Christian architect interested in logos: the Temple of Solomon. The Temple of Solomon figures prominently in the art of the 16th century Veneto. Both Titian and Tintoretto painted a version of the presentation of the Virgin in the Temple of Solomon, and Sebastiano del Piombo's Judgment of Solomon, and Sebastiano del Piombo's Judgment of Solomon illustrates the extent to which Solomon was considered an archetype of wisdom. Another dominant theme in architecture and painting in northern Italy during the period was the Solomonic spiral column. Columns resembling those described in the Temple of Solomon found their way into architect Giulio Romano's Palazzo del Te and Palazzo Ducale in Mantua, and his obsession with the trope is clearly visible from the many drawings and paintings he left behind that feature the column. Palladio, who worked with Romano on the Palazzo Tiene in his first project in Vicenza, would certainly have been familiar with his predecessor's work. The Venetian painter Paolo Cagliari, known as Veronese, depicted the columns several times in the Venetian capital. Well, that's where that is. His apotheosis of Venice in the Palazzo Ducale and the Annunciation in the Church of San Giovanni Paolo, and the frescoed walls here of the Villa Palladio built for Daniele Barbaro at Macer all display a preoccupation with this architectural trope. Solomon was known for his wisdom, and central to that wisdom is the virtue of prudence, which is mentioned along with Solomon in the Bible several times. These are just some quotes from Solomon. Every prudent man dealeth with knowledge. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, and a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Painted just years after the infamous meeting of Socinus and his assemblies known as the Collegio Vicentina in 1546. Anselmo Canera painted this image of prudence on the ceiling of the main assembly room in the Palazzo Tieni, Palladio's first project. Okay, prudence has long been considered by many, if logos is what can be considered the main objective of Freemasonry, according to Colonel John Fellows, Freemason, and other Freemasons like Albert Pike, again, Albert Mackey, the way to logos is actually obtained through the virtue of prudence. Okay, now the fact that this image of prudence was painted in 1546, the precise date just 4 years after the precise date of this Collegio Vicentina, that Abbé Lefranc says was when Freemasonry began, inspired me to do some research into this whole question here. Okay, and so this image must have been particularly salient in the city at the time because it had recently come under intense scrutiny by the church for its public embrace of the Reformation and Lutheranism. Okay, using prudence as my central thematic thrust in my first chapter, I draw on Canera's revolutionary depiction of prudence to explore how revolutionary practices were adopted with particular zeal in the city of Vicenza, eventually proceeding independently from Luther, Calvin, and other reformers to develop a unique liberal theology that would be adopted by the Brotherhood of Freemasons. I begin by identifying the figure on top of the snake above the constellations, which is represented here by the signs of the zodiac, the outermost sphere of Plato's Harmony of the Spheres, which I identify as the being basically above the Empyrean, or in the Empyrean, if you look at these. And so this relates to the Freemasonry, the harmony of the spheres relates to the Freemasonry idea of the Jacob's ladder and the planets representing those 7 rungs of the ladder. Now, the 8th and final sphere, which is in Plato's, which Plato talks about, is the outermost sphere of the zodiac or the constellations, and so. As Plato describes it in the Phaedrus, but of the heaven above the heavens, so let me go back here, sir. Yeah, there. But of the heaven above the heavens, what earthly poet ever did or will sing worthily? It is such as I will describe, for I must dare to speak the truth when the truth is my theme. There abides the being with which true knowledge is concerned, the colorless, formless, intangible essence, visible only to the mind, the pilot of the soul. In this chapter, I draw heavily on Marsilio Ficino, one of the spearheads of the Platonic academies in the Renaissance, who wrote extensively on the subject of the immortality of the soul. Drawing on the philosophy of Plato, Ficino was convinced that if the soul is immortal, then only the cultivation of the soul could bring it closer to the divinity of God, which is its end goal. As if he were quoting Ficino himself, American Freemason Colonel John Fellows explains the importance of the progress of the soul to Freemasonry as follows. Quote, if the soul is immortal, it stands in need of cultivation and improvement, not only for the time we call life, but for the future, or what we call the time eternity, end quote. In my second chapter, Towards a Logos of Architecture in Palladio's Villa Barbaro at Macer, I continue by examining the ceiling fresco of the Sala dell'Olimpo, where a similar being appears above a dragon instead of a snake. Here we discover that this is the same being in the Empyrean talked about by Plato and others. I examine Daniele Barbaro's 10 Libri dell'Architettura, where I evaluate Barbaro's method for determining the location of the entrance to the Empyrean by first locating the jewel of the 7 stars, which Manly P. Hall correctly identified as the 7 rishi of the bear, who act as the guardian to her lair. Oops, yeah. I continue I continue by identifying the similarities between the ceiling fresco and the alchemical figure of Rebus, one of the identifying emblems of Freemasonry. And you can see here the woman on the dragon in the center of the picture is surrounded by the 7 planetary gods. They're actually deities that are, you can recognize each of them: Apollo with his lyre, Mercury with his with his wings on his cap, and here, if you look at Rebus, he's surrounded by exactly the same 7 planets on the top, and he's standing on a dragon, which is above the earth. The dragon representing the constellation Draco, of course, because that is where the location of the Empyrean is the entrance to the location of the Empyrean is located, which Daniele Barbaro talks a lot about in his Dieci Libri. In this chapter, I also evaluate the architectural layout of the building. This is just a little, you can see how here there's 7 stars that actually spin around the North Star. And those 7 stars that appear in the emblems, or sorry, in the Freemasonry boards, and a lot of people have talked about those before being the Pleiades, and in Daniele Barbaro it specifically talked about those are the 7 stars of the Settentrione, basically the small bear that actually encircle the North Pole. And so I continue in this chapter to look at how Palladio attempted to turn architecture itself, basically the living word of God, into a living image of architecture in his buildings. And obviously this being his first attempt, I'll just go through these slides very quickly, basically mimicking that same spoked wheel here that represents. Where in essence, the building itself, I also look at the alignment of the building and how the building was aligned so that the sun would rise on December 21st and shine directly into the center of the building, into the back. And these analemas, the timepieces that were on both sides of the building were actually there to help him locate the building. My third chapter considers Palladio's Villa La Rotonda, often regarded as the apogee of his career. Here I examine differences between La Rotonda and the Villa Barbaro, built by, the Villa Barbaro at Masera, and illustrate how the architect perfected his vision of a living image in logos in architecture by highlighting the system used by mariners to determine the location of the Empyrean, and introducing an oculus. Here you can see the harmony of the spheres. Basically, these again in the very center of the villa are the 8 planetary gods, and he introduced an oculus to represent logos as it was explained in Plato's Cratylus, as something that, quote, signifies all things, moves circularly, is in perpetual motion, and is twofold, true and false together. My fourth chapter considers one of the most pervasive elements in Freemasonry, the predilection for symbolism in the form of emblems and hieroglyphs. And here I draw on Titian's famous painting of the Allegory of Prudence, where I examine the intersection of hieroglyphs with the art of memory, particularly Giulio Comello's Idea del Teatro, in which he discusses the art of memory, particularly in regards to logos. And here I talk about how Titian's painting was trying to understand logos through the virtue of prudence, as many Freemasons have said that it does. My last chapter uses reverse chronology to trace movements that might have led to the development in Vicenza. This chapter looks at predecessors like the Palazzo del Te in Mantua as a model of logos and architecture, as well as the first illustrated book of its kind, the Hebnerotomachia Polifili. And I consider how this wonder of architecture and this late Renaissance book were used, along with the art of memory, to instill the precepts of the cultivation of the soul, so fundamental to Freemasonry. Going through as you as you enter the building and do a progression through it, it is square, but almost intentionally circular in the way that you progress through it. You start with a room dedicated to Egyptian hieroglyphs, and as you move through, at the beginning, you're met with a lot of imagery in the building that have to deal with instances where we do not have control over our destiny, such as Hercules and his labors that were imposed upon him. And this is the image of the war between the Titans and the Olympian gods. And as you progress through, you start to see more of this symbolism that is Masonic in nature, of course, the all-seeing eye, on a statue of Minerva. And we also start to see the issue of free will, where we begin to see the ability to make choices as opposed to destiny, and truly, the focus here for the building is mostly on making choices that are kind and making decisions that help people. Prudence, of course, being one of the main themes again, and then finally this last image. This is the last room in the palace that you go through, and it represents the Plato described the journey of the soul. If we are, the journey to our soul eventually should take us to the point where we are like gods. We don't have he described our souls as being charioteers driven by a black steed and a white steed. And in Freemasonry, Albert Pike actually talks about a white sphinx and a black sphinx, and those are the two things that guide us. And when we reach that empyrean, when we reach that godly state, we are supposed to have these white horses that, that represent our final excel into. Okay. Anyway. Readers interested in Freemasonry and the art and architecture of 16th century Italy should find something of value in my book. I hope they will appreciate how, like Luther, those associated with the origins of Freemasonry demanded that we think about evolving with our hearts as well as our minds, since at its heart, Freemasonry seems to be about the evolution of kindness. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll have Henri, and he'll be talking about the Splendid Feast of Scottish Rite grades, AASR. And do you need the podium as well?
I was this morning in the other auditorium to speak in French, and I thought it a good idea this afternoon just to pay respect to PSO and the audience to speak in English. My basic language is French, and you will understand that sometimes there are mistakes, of course. I thought it interesting to try to dig into the idea of what I call the Feast of Scottish Rite. And I mean by that let's make me a preamble. In its diversity, Freemasonry is multiple. It would be even multiple by multiple in the terms of you may wish, since all the angles to look at the history or at the phenomenon Scottish Rite are enormous. You have the historian on the one side this morning and yesterday during the conference. There were a lot of very, very academic historians talking about the roots of the Rite and all the development, the contradiction, the line, the main lines, and so on and so forth. And if I take the multiplicity of views, considering the Scottish Rite all around the world, you have viewpoints coming from the time, historian, coming from the difference between countries where the Scottish Rite is practiced. Then you have all the people. You have all the people everywhere with their own tradition, mixing up in the Scottish Rite, and then you have angles per person. So it's a multiple of multiple of multiple. It makes me think, I'm an engineer, so it makes me think of the number of infinites as translated by Georg Cantor, who invented many years ago the idea of transfinite, series of infinite, infinite, infinite. So the views to the Scottish Rite are enormous, enormous. And let me take a few examples to try to attract your attention to that. In French, there are many books. In the Grand Orient de France, located in the 9th arrondissement in Paris, there is a small shop, a library, where you can buy books about Masonry, actual, present books. And I was there the day before yesterday, and I asked, how many new books have you in your bookshop? And they thought, hey, you there, another friend over there, how many books do we have here? Or more than 3,000 new books, new books. And then I went to the library of the Grand Orient de France next door, and then how many books have you got in your Bibliothèque Nationale? It's a national museum, and they have over 30,000. That means that between the shop and the main association, Obedience, we say, there are 1 to 10 books in comparison. And then there is a moving wave of new books coming in, told the shopkeeper. So that means that there is a marvelous interest to the rites, French Rite, Scottish Rite, all kind of angles to look at the thing, at least in France. And if you go to other countries, it's about the same thing. So there's a renewal of interest to what is perhaps the history of Freemasonry, but I think to the method of the Masonry in itself since 300 centuries. And now there is a revival of that going on. And I call it, in a way, at the feast of the Scottish Rite, just concentrating on the Scottish Rite itself, letting a little bit aside the structure of other things. So if there are so numerous angles to look at the Masonry and to put Masonry in perspective, I think that a thing that is almost constant since the beginning, but it was a bit under shadow, that is the faithful to the fundamental foundation of self-seeking, an immanent process based on the improvement of one's own person. There are historians talking about the sociability of Freemasonry in the 18th century. There are famous academics in France talking about the relationship between the nobles, between the laymen, and talking to one another, having dinner together, and going on, and having a sort of mixture of the society going on in the 18th century, in the very beginning of the 18th century in France. So, but that's a view, And I think that if you look a little bit and you dig into the philosophy of Freemasonry right from the beginning, there are this famous motto in Latin called vitriol in French. Vitriol in French, but as a matter of fact, it's a Latin motto which says, visit the interior of the earth, by rectification thou shalt find the hidden stone. As a matter of fact, it is not in the very beginning of Freemasonry. It was introduced in the Masonry some 100 years afterwards, after the thing. But basically, I think the core of the Freemasonry right from the beginning is the improvement of the person in terms of sociability, in terms of self-explanation, in terms of what do I do here, since, as a matter of fact, the temptation of this history by that time was to replace God by the human being as being on the top of the institution. Now we have replaced little by little God by human being, and therefore the idea of progress, the idea of self-improvement, the idea of self-development, the idea of development as such. And then it went on and on and on and on and on. And you can trace in the Rite, the Masonic rites, all this accompanying process to help people to develop oneself in various ways. According to the situation, you have not to make the essence of things, but to try to put things against the backcloth of civilization in a certain country and in a certain time. But altogether, it is the improvement of the human being as such, right from the beginning, and to try to escape the chains. You find in many codes of that time chains that are abandoned, and that the human being is developed and try to put himself in the air and then to float and to be free. So that's the basic thing, I think, right from the beginning. And if visit the interior of the earth by rectification, thou shalt find the hidden stone. As a matter of fact, it is a Belgian alchemist which discovered that sort of thing and put it in the so-called Masonic constructivism we experienced right from the beginning of the beginning of the 18th century. Constructivism of Masonry. I try to associate two other mottos to my presentation. The first motto is well-known to the American, and I pay perhaps respect a second time to our American friend. This motto is E pluribus unum, which you find on many American seals, on dollars and so on and so forth, which means that by multiple roots you find something above, which is the state or the belief in God or whatever. The thing that are that is assembling the various elements of people put together, which try to make, which makes another kind of level of understanding through the state in this thing. But there is another one which is almost similar. And in the Grand Orient de France, there is a huge temple, for instance, and you find there unus omnibus, Latin again. Unus, it's the one thing, and omnibus is through others. Through others, unus omnibus. And that's a little bit the same thing. Instead of putting a state above, a sort of ceiling on the variation, on the architecture of Masonry, then you find unus omnibus, which is unus is put in front through others, helped by others. And that's also one of the key points of the rites, which is to develop the one single person through others, and then through the methods of formalism, of understanding, of gestures, of decoration, of brothers and sisters, functions, and all kind of the various types of languages that are used to make the difference between the normal world and an artificial world, which is inside our temples, to try to educate people in a way of singularity, and then to make the scission, the frontier, the border between what is outside the temple and what is inside the temple. And to be unique in that sense. And therefore, unus omnibus, which you find in the Grand Orient de France. And then it's easy to make the mental process to try to find out what is a constant development since the very beginning. So, if I talk a bit about myself, I'm Freemason for many, many years already, and I am in the Scottish Rite, right from the beginning. And if I take myself, we have in France an organization by which all the ceremonies, the receptions, the meals, and whatever, all kind of societies we are having together. I belong to the so-called Blue Lodge, apprentice, fellow, and then master. And in the Scottish Rite, I practice the 4th and the 14th. I practice the 18th. I practice the 30th Kadosh, which we were talking about this morning. During the conference, the whole morning in the Grand Auditorium was dedicated to the Kadosh. And then the other until 33. And the participation is not the participation from the lowest to the highest. It's a participation of a person, myself in the case, which according to my own timetable, sometimes I jump from black to blue, from blue to red, from red to white, from white again to blue, and then to black and so on. And if you look at what happens in my mind, so to say, there is other views put to my knowledge, to my understanding, to my feels, so to say, according to what the various grades of the AASR, the accepted ancient accepted Scottish Rite, propose with the myth, with the names, with the variations of putting you in other words throughout the various sequence of assemblies, meetings, discussions, whatever. So I have to jump from like an acrobat, so to say, from one color to the next and so on and so forth. And I believe it creates in myself, without being proud of it, but it's a lot for everyone, it is an expansion of your mindset in itself to have various surroundings according to which you have to pair your own thoughts with what is the format of the surrounding in which you work and which other are doing the same thing. So it's a sort of very complicated mental process throughout the time. It's like homeopathy, a little bit all the time, a little bit all the time, a little bit all the time, and then you alter the route to yourself, so to say. And I find is a kind of accompanied self-education according to the programs which are offered. You take part a little bit or very strongly, you take no part, you dream or you sleep or you are absent. But if you are there, it's a joy all the time if you try to figure out what is happening when you are participating actively to all the thing. It's like an actor. It's like an actor having to enter a sort of let's say, I try to play Macbeth, for instance, if I'm able to do that, and I have to enter Macbeth in order to appear as Macbeth, to transmit the message of Shakespeare to the audience. In other way, the Masonic process is of the same kind. But Macbeth doesn't exist. It's yourself. It's yourself which is the main token of the whole game. And as a matter of fact, a splendor, I find it a splendor if you enter in Masonic meetings, not just I have to go there, I'm going to work, I'm already tired, and so on and so forth. If you take it as a feast to enter and to enter this new world, which you know already, but since things are changing and you are not all the time, every day in the same facing the same audience or the same society, then you have to change yourself. And I believe, in that sense, you are broadening, you're conscious of things going on when going outside the temple again. That's my view. After many, 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 many years, it is a lively thing, which is, in this process, is a very helpful process to keep your mental health. So splendor in itself. And this experience is a joy. I think it's a joy. But you have to attend with pleasure. You have to attend with interest, like playing music. You wouldn't imagine a musician going under his conductor without being forced to have entered the music before playing. The conductor will be rejecting you the next time. So you have to enter in it and then to participating to the joy of having the same music with the other musicians, and then it's a joy for everyone because you are coming with positive mind, and then you enter the orchestra, the music, and you pay honor to the composer, obviously. And if so, you can translate this sort of experiment I'm talking about in painting, in music, in daily life. And that's the benefit of belonging to a rite and to practice it. I'm not just making any kind of marketing for the Scottish rite, but I find after so many years, it's a wonderful thing to do and to happen. And I'm not yet finished, but almost finished, in the sense that there is a Frenchman called Antonin Artaud. He's a philosopher, he's been a poet, he's been many, many things, a little bit foolish as well. And he's talking about an actor for the theater, as an emotional athlete. Do you understand what I mean? An emotional athlete. I quote the French artist, and he says, it is not only a question of engaging in a performance, but to reactivate at each performance the emotions and energies of each of the characters, the way we look at it and interpret it, I mean the performance. So if we take this view, to look for the Scottish Rite as a companion of your education, it is quite an extraordinary process, and it happens to be alive for the last 3 centuries already. So if you are questioning yourself about the 3 centuries, it's quite something for social bodies to remain for 3 centuries. Then there should be some magic potion, magic lotion, whatever you like, to help you to understand by what sort of secret this has been going on and on and on and on over 300 years. So I ask myself the question, and I say, well, perhaps a little bit of the answer is in the pleasure, in the desire, in the feast, in the splendor, and the joy to participating, and then to remain in the system. Whatever can happen, because there are adversities in life, but if you happen to take this view right from the beginning, you are never deceived. You are never deceived, and you have all the time the joy to participating. And as a matter of fact, I will end with that. It made me think of a kind of view developed in, 20, 30 years ago by a man who's dead now, a professor at the Collège de France. Collège de France is in France a huge academic institution. It's the university of universities. It is the top of the top of the top. French. So you remain French anyway. So in doing so, and I'm talking about Claude Lévi-Strauss. Claude Lévi-Strauss, known because he was a marvelous anthropologist. He wrote marvelous book, and perhaps a little bit behind, but you know, when you are famous, when living, then you have a sort of shadow coming on, and then suddenly it comes back. And I think it's a coming back in the way of, he developed what he called the wild thought. The wild thought, la pensée sauvage in French. I don't know, Italian would be? Thank you, thank you. And he says the following, I quote, with the help of distinctions and oppositions, wild thought construct mental structure which facilitates the intelligence of the world. It forms a well-articulated system independent of this other system that will constitute science. So it's not an opposition to science. Wild thought, it's not the savage thought, by the savage. No, it's an understanding of the world as compared to the scientific world, rational, 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, and so on and so forth. It's a way of looking at things as a whole and try to make connections in sort of grid between the elements you know, and there is an understanding, very emotional, of course, but also very intuitive in the understanding of what happens. So science is science, and it's necessary, but this wild approach of the world is also necessary in order not to be lost, in a way. And if you take someone in a jungle, he has to keep alive while understanding what happens around him in the jungle, with tigers, lions, snakes, whatever you may find on your way, and you have to keep alive and to understand the reaction of others. And my thinking today is to understand that the world is becoming more and more and more complex. So the understanding of this world is very difficult for the layman, for everyone. People are very experienced in a very small field, but knocking at the door next door, it's very difficult to understand what happens to your colleague working next room on another subject. So to work as a savage, as a wild cat going in the jungle, you have to understand emotionally what happens. And then Claude Lévi-Strauss is, as a matter of fact, a marvelous helper in the way to revive this global approach, as in the former times, probably our ancestors in Freemasonry had a global understanding of life and trying to draw various lines between opposition. You talked to Freebis, for instance, alchemistry. Rebus is exactly the same idea, to try to make the union between two contraries and try to find out what is the probable or the best link possible between two opposition. Conjunctio oppositorum, said Jung in one of his books, to try to find what is the connection, the best connection possible between opposition or things that are nothing to do with one another. And then you progress if you try to make links that are perhaps very good links and proven scientifically, or even if they are imaginary, it's the same thing because it works. And then you value the process of being able to give you an answer, and then perhaps there could be another answer sometimes later, but in the meantime you can go on. And the process is better than not understanding what is the opposition of two elements, for instance. Well, I'm almost finished, and again, I would like to stress the fact that Masonry is and the Scottish Rite, with the various layers, if you understand them and you try to make sense out of each layer, I did mention earlier on, the blue, the green, the red, the black, the white, and the transition between all then you have an expansion of your old mind. I would like to quote as a conclusion, an inscription by one of our poets in France called Paul Valéry. You know Paris and you know the Trocadero. Trocadero, there are museum over there. And if you have the Eiffel Tower in your back, there is an inscription on the left side, if my memory is right. And I quote, and I translate it into English. It depends on whoever passes that I'm a grave or a treasure, that I speak or keep quiet. This depends on you, my friend. Don't enter without desire. I think Masonry is a bit the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. So now we can have some questions. Does anybody have any, to start for any of the presenters, you can ask questions. You want to start?
Oh, thanks very much to Emanuela Locci and to Michael Coughlin for your contribution. It was fascinating. I've been fascinated by Palladio and all your presentation. And because we have not much time, ti faccio due domande, meglio se poi tu le traduci alla gente, è così più rapido. La prima è se nel tuo libro parlate sull'unificazione del rito di Memphis Mizraim per Garibaldi e tutta l'influenza del rito egizio in Italia, la costituzione della massoneria all'Italia. È una domanda. Cosa ne pensi su questa unificazione per Garibaldi del rito di Memphis Mizraim? Se hai qualche opinione. E seconda domanda, qual è stata secondo te la contribuzione più qualitativa delle donne in un paese come l'Italia o come me la Spagna del sud Europa, dove sono molto maschili e dove l'incorporazione delle donne al mondo del lavoro, alla professione, allo studio è stata molto lenta? Se facciamo la comparazione con dei paesi della Francia, del nord, degli Stati Uniti o dell'Inghilterra, Gran Bretagna, tutto questo. Qual è secondo te la contribuzione della donna alla massoneria in Italia, Sardegna o al mondo? Sì, grazie.
Non so se funziona questo, sì? Ok.
Ma forse se puoi tradurre, to translate
sì.
in English.
So the two questions are related. As first to the Egyptian rite, if there is any part of the essay on the Grand Orient of Italy that focuses on these and on the unification of the rite, and by Garibaldi. And then the second issue is considering, which is the contribution of women, and then specifically since we are talking about women in Freemasonry, but the contribution of women in experiences as in Spain or in Italy, but generally speaking in the South Europe if compared to the Anglo-Saxon countries, relating to the present days, to some way the discrimination that lies beneath almost every field. So was the thought of the author, since she has, of course, faced in one of the two papers the female issue in the Grand Orient of Italy.
Allora, per rispondere alla prima domanda, purtroppo no, nel senso che non abbiamo approfondito quel tema, perché di solito comunque nei miei libri non parlo della questione dei riti, perché un po' è lontano dalla nostra specializzazione, cioè come storici di solito ci occupiamo della descrizione della storia dell'obbedienza, però non ci soffermiamo tanto sul rito, perché è avremo bisogno di un altro tipo di studio. Per quanto riguarda Garibaldi, non ho trattato in questo libro, però su di lui abbiamo parlato in un altro libro che è relativo alle donne e massoneria e al fatto che lui fosse favorevole all'ingresso delle donne in massoneria, però sul rito non abbiamo trattato. Invece, per quanto riguarda la seconda... ok, sì.
Okay, on replying to the first question, since the research profile comes from a person that moves into historical scholarship, so she's an historian, so the aspect of the wraith is not faced, so at least on historical point of view, the facts on the obedience are handled as the origins, the development, the multiple relationships with the social and political network that is surrounding, of course, this another human experience of the obediences themselves. But related specifically to a part of this first question, so since we have been mentioning Garibaldi as the responsible for the unification of the Egyptian Rite, Garibaldi as well as not being handled deeply in this, say, on the Grand Orient of Italy, though has been many times mentioned in another publishing from Emanuela Locci that focuses on the female Masonry history. Of course, we're talking about the Italian experience, and then Garibaldi distinguished himself for being supporting the presence, the female presence inside the obediences. So this to reply to the first item.
Invece per rispondere alla seconda domanda, allora mi sono occupata di storia della massoneria femminile, appunto nel libro Storia della massoneria femminile, dalle obbedienze, dalle corporazioni alle obbedienze. Allora, il problema principale per quanto riguarda paesi come l'Italia e la Spagna, che io tra l'altro la Spagna non l'ho trattata in quel libro, però ho scritto un articolo che uscirà a breve su una rivista tratto dalla storia della Grande Loggia Femminile di Spagna. Allora, purtroppo il contributo massonico delle donne in questi due paesi è basso, nel senso che numericamente non sono un numero molto elevato. Quindi ovviamente non riescono a dare un'impronta, a lasciare una traccia nella storia della massoneria, nel suo sistema nazionale, diciamo. Gli altri paesi, Francia, Inghilterra, la situazione è completamente differente. In Italia e in Spagna invece la situazione è abbastanza ferma. Adesso non so come si tradurrà ferma in inglese. Stop, sì, purtroppo non si riesce ad andare oltre quello che c'è già. E devo dire che sono esperienze, almeno per in Italia, molto frammentarie, cioè c'è molta divisione. In Spagna invece ho notato che ci sono molte obbedienze, poi ce n'è una solo femminile, però ho visto anche che numericamente è molto bassa, quindi non riesce proprio a decollare, ecco, come esperienza massonica.
Ma io la domanda era qualitativamente.
Qualitativamente? Ah, ok.
Che c'è qualche contribuzione qualitativa, non soltanto del numero.
Okay. Qualitativamente devo dire che le spagnole secondo me sono più attive delle italiane. Perché ho visto che partecipano a molte attività anche nella società, okay? Anche al di fuori delle loro riunioni di loggia, che comunque la loro gran maestra, che so che è cambiata recentemente, partecipa a molti convegni, però che non sono solo organizzati da loro, ma anche al di fuori. Questo in Italia non capita, cioè ci sono dei convegni, vengono organizzati dei convegni, ma dall'obbedienza, e quindi partecipano quasi esclusivamente le donne dell'obbedienza. Anche se sono aperte al pubblico, è difficile che ci sia una partecipazione esterna. Questo è. Poi, certo, sono molto impegnate nel sociale, ad esempio, però purtroppo non sono attività che pubblicizzate, io le chiamo, okay, non si vedono al di fuori degli ambienti massonici. E questo magari potrebbe essere un problema, nel senso che se fosse più pubblicizzato si vedrebbe effettivamente la presenza massonica femminile nel territorio, nella nazione, nella società. Questo ancora non accade. Il problema fondamentalmente secondo me è quello. Scusa Manuela, adesso sono andata a braccio.
Well, just to remind, the second issue was about the contribution of women in Masonry with a specific point of view on the Italian or the South European context. And so, just to mention the book that we had already talked about on Garibaldi's contribute to Freemasonry, so the history of female Masonry, edited by Bastoggi Libri, and to have a very recent paper on the history of the feminine Grand Lodge of Spain, actually is a huge topic to face, despite talking about a systematic contribute that can be appreciated also as an outcome out from Masonry. It's quite hard to talk, meaning that regarding Italy, the experiences are scattered, are very narrowed in any obedience, since we are talking also, obviously about mixed obediences. And more than happens, for instance, to the sister country of Spain. Spain has got a more homogeneous kind of environment about female Masonry. They have a public outcome, so the impression is that that environment some ways reports more fervent activity of female contribution, female presence in Freemasonic institutions, and more, if you want, not directly related only to Masonic initiatives, so able also to involve and be involved in other public context related to social purposes and charities and so on. This is something that distinguishes Spain more than Italy, not just because experiences like this one are lacking, but since there is no public outcome of what's going on, and so we can assume at the very end that it's not just about the number, but it's just about how some way are communicated or some way are emphasized the actions of women in Masonic institutions in Italy. So this is what comes from a few years of direct experience and observation and from the scholarship.
I think we have time for one more question. Does anybody have?
It's a question for Michael. It was a really interesting presentation, Michael. Thanks very much. And I think you're right to emphasize the importance of Palladio in early 18th century Freemasonry. The first issue of the constitutions carries an advert for engravings for Palladio. So there's a lot of things to follow up there, and you indicate, and in your book obviously indicates, a very rich field of research. I was intrigued by your discussion of the appearance of various symbols in Palladio's work, obviously including the all-seeing eye and so on. The Masonic researcher Andy Doerr, who's very interested in these symbols, published a very suggestive article in Ars Quattro Coronatorum shortly before he died in 2011, in which he was drawing attention to these as a kind of wide stock that were widely made use of fraternal. These 16th, 17th century emblem books are fascinating, and we've got a big collection at the University of Glasgow. And I wondered what your view is of the kind of route in for those symbols. Do you think they're taken directly from the emblem books at an early stage, or do you think they come through intermediaries like Palladio?
Hello? Yeah. I think I have two feelings about it, because for me, I mean, there's a lot of, I looked at emblems, lots of, books of emblems, obviously, in Italy at the time. in the archives, old books. Piero Valeriano is one of the most famous emblem producers of the time. And if you go through the city of Vicenza, the city of Venice, the city of Bassano del Grappa, you actually find a lot of these emblems in statue form that probably date to much earlier than Piero Valeriano's. So it's really quite interesting that they were obviously there. I mean, obviously, if I had images up, I'd pull one up again. If you remember the image of Titian with the three heads at the bottom of that, it's called the Tricipitium. And you see them all over Venice. They were, from the 13th century. One of the earliest ones is, from the 13th century. And it was a mascot for the Teatro Olimpico in Vicenza. And it was probably built in the late 15th century. So, obviously even Rebus, there's such a migration of different things when it comes to Freemasonry. That's what's so interesting to me now, especially after writing this book, because Rebus, as many of you know, was actually, Heinrich, what was his last name? I can't remember it now, but he was, the illustrator was actually from Germany. Yeah, and that's where it was first printed in 1619, and it did become, but it came out of a tradition that, really, well, Henry, you talked a little bit about it in terms of this whole idea of bringing these two opposites together. This figure that was on top of the dragon, it was a woman, but it represented Minerva, or Isis, or Athena, whichever one you want to call it, which is actually, who has always been considered both male and female. And Rebus is both male and female. Actually, in Pike's book, famous 8,000-page book, I can't remember, the morals and dogma of the Scottish Rite. He ends the book basically by saying that Rebus is basically Minerva. Born from the head of Zeus, but both, but a woman and yet in armor because she was represented as a man as well. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
I'd like, if I may, add a few things. I'm a researcher as well, and some years ago in France, in Paris, we tried to trace the various gestures of the Masonic rites all over the 3 centuries, right from the beginning. And what is constant right from the beginning until now are several signals, signs, what we call position of order, position of signs, position of sign. I would say sign order is the posture, it's fixed. And then you have the signal, which is the sign, which is the movement. And a lot of them are the same as in the beginning. And then tracing a little bit the gestures over time and over countries, we found out that there were several similarities between the Baroque gestures by the 16th, 17th century in France, notably, with the Masonic signal, signs, posture in the grades of perfection, not the blue Masonry, but the signals, the signs, the order, postures in the perfection grades. And then looking, for instance, if you talk about the sky is there. And the devil is down. And you have this kind of gesture over time, which are translate up to now. And looking grade after grade, there are several signals. And possibly the language changes, the variation of the environment also is moving. And what is constant, steady over time are the postures and the signs. The posture static and the signs as dynamic. And well, it's a beginning of study of things happening then. But we have to trace and make drawings and try to make an understanding of the gesture, which is a bit complicated, like having the right geography for someone in the early 19th century, trying to get the right movements to say it was by that way that things were done at that time. And that's the beginning of a huge amount of research to be done.
Okay, thank you guys for attending this presentation. Again, thank you to Emanuela, Michael, and Henry for their presentations. So now we're going to coffee hour, and then we have one more presentation before the conclusion, and then the cocktail toast. It's just Thank you. The water.
My PhD wasn't about Freemasonry. My PhD was on Palladio. Yeah. And then after I did my PhD is when I found the document by Emanuela Locci, and I thought, and the very first chapter of my